You are standing in a Virginia tobacco field in 1670, and the man working beside you could be your equal in every legal way that matters. He's from West Africa. You're from Ireland, or maybe England, sold into servitude for the cost of your own boat ticket. Neither of you owns anything. Neither of you is free. And under the law as it exists this exact year, you are both simply servants, bound for a set number of years, after which you are both entitled to walk off this land as free people with a legal claim to your own labor. Your skin color is not a legal category yet. That sentence should sound impossible. It isn't. Historian Edmund Morgan spent years digging through colonial Virginia's actual court records, and what he found breaks the story most people were taught. In the early to mid-1600s, enslaved and indentured workers of every background labored side by side, married across those lines, ran away together, and in some documented cases, sued their masters together and won. Free black landowners existed in early Virginia. Some had once been enslaved themselves and bought their own freedom. One of them, a man named Anthony Johnson, arrived in Virginia enslaved, worked his way to freedom, acquired hundreds of acres of land, and even owned indentured servants of his own, a level of legal standing that would become flatly impossible for a black man in that same colony within a single generation. The rigid, permanent, race-based system you picture when you picture American slavery did not exist yet. It hadn't been invented. Then, in 1676, a failed uprising called Bacon's Rebellion terrified the Virginia elite so badly that they rewrote the entire system within a few years. Poor English colonists, indentured servants, and enslaved Africans banded together, burned the colonial capital to the ground, and came within a hair of overthrowing the entire planter class. It didn't succeed, but the people in power looked at what almost happened and drew one very specific, very cold conclusion. The thing that made that alliance possible was that poor people of every background had more in common with each other than with the elite. That alliance had to be made impossible, permanently. Quick break from the story because this channel is still small and I'd rather ask you directly than bury it in an outro nobody watches. If this is holding your attention, hit subscribe now. That's genuinely how a channel like this grows. Okay, back to Virginia. So the Virginia legislature did something you rarely see so explicitly in the historical record. Over the next few decades, they passed law after law that had nothing to do with skin color on their surface and everything to do with it in practice. In 1662, Virginia passed a law stating that a child's legal status as free or enslaved would follow the mother, not the father, reversing centuries of English legal tradition specifically so that white slave owners fathering children with enslaved women could not accidentally free their own offspring. In 1691, the same legislature banned interracial marriage outright, and around that same set of statutes, the word white appears in Virginia law for what may be the first time as an official legal category, not a description anyone had bothered to formalize before. Laws made servitude for English colonists limited, but slavery for African colonists hereditary and permanent. Laws gave poor white colonists new legal privileges specifically denied to black colonists, free or enslaved, privileges that cost the elite almost nothing but that gave poor white people something to lose by ever allying with black people again. Historian Theodore Allen called this exactly what it was, the deliberate invention of a new legal category called white, built specifically to fracture a coalition the ruling class was afraid of. Here's the part that should really unsettle you. The science came after. Nearly a century after these laws were already reshaping who could be enslaved and who couldn't. European naturalists started publishing formal racial classification systems, ranking human skulls, inventing rigid categories with official-sounding names, providing the scientific costume for a legal and economic system that colonial legislatures had already built. Historian Nell Irvin Painter has traced how these scientific race categories were assembled well after the fact, dressing up an economic arrangement in the language of biology so it would look like it had always been natural, inevitable, discovered rather than built. So the order almost everyone assumes is backwards. Most people picture it as humans noticed racial differences, decided some races were inferior, and built slavery on top of that belief. The actual documented order runs the other way. A specific economic problem in a specific colony in a specific decade needed a solution. The solution was a hardened racial hierarchy, invented through law first and justified through pseudoscience generations later. Race wasn't the reason slavery happened. Race was the tool built to keep it running, once the people in power realized what happened when the workers underneath them stopped seeing each other as different. This channel exists because the parts of history that get left out of the textbook are usually the parts that explain everything else about it. If you didn't know, the racial categories you grew up with were built on purpose by specific people. For a specific reason, you're exactly who we made this for. Subscribe if you want more of the history they skipped, and drop a comment with the detail that got you. And if you know someone who thinks this is just how it's always been, send them this one. It wasn't. Someone built it.